Good morning. I'm Pat Johnson. I'm one of the commissioners. This- I'm one of the commissioners, and I represent Randolph County, which is Pocahontas. And some of you may not know where Pocahontas is, but we're there. I am really honored to introduce our first speaker today, Elise Hampton. She is passionate about children and education. She has been in the field of education for 9 years and has held several positions: fifth grade social studies teacher, seventh grade science teacher, middle school science instructional coach, assistant principal, and currently principal at the North Little Rock Middle School, on the 7th and 8th grade campus. When Elise is not at work, she continues her commitment to education as a commissioner on the Black History Commission of Arkansas. Elise is a proud 2009 graduate of Mount St. Mary Academy. She is also a two-time graduate of the University of Central Arkansas, where she earned a bachelor's degree in middle level education and a master's degree in school leadership, management, and administration. She has an educational specialist degree in educational leadership from the University of Arkansas. Elise enjoys health and fitness, reading and writing, Sunday brunch, National Public Radio, and spending time with her family. She is the daughter of retired teacher Susan Hampton and Reverend Dr. Logan Hampton Jr., and has a twin sister, Crystal, and a brother, Logan III. She is also a dog mama to her American bully, Remy. Let's please welcome Elise.
Okay, good morning. So today I'm going to be speaking about the state of race relations in K-12 education. In particular, I'm going to be focusing on the recent legislation that has come up that pertains to education. As Ms. Johnson mentioned, I am currently the principal at North Little Rock Middle School, 7th and 8th grade campus. The campus has had several names. Some of you may know the campus as Lakewood Middle School. Some of you may know the campus as Northeast. I can typically tell what generation a person is from just based on what they refer to our campus as. But we are that campus that you see over there by McCain Mall. I will also mention that I have been on the Black History Commission of Arkansas for several years, but this is the very first time that I have been able to speak at one of our symposiums, so I am incredibly excited to have this opportunity. I'm going to start our conversation this morning with the executive order to prohibit indoctrination and critical race theory in schools. And here I have a quote from that executive order, and this is the piece of that executive order that pertains to professional development of educators. And it says, "The secretary shall ensure that no school employee or student shall be required to attend trainings or orientations based on prohibited indoctrination or CRT." And a little bit later, I'm going to speak to what this looks like in K-12 education right now. Another piece of this executive order addresses instruction. And here is another quote from that executive order, and it states, review the rules, regulations, policies, materials, and communications of the Department of Education to identify any items that may, purposely or otherwise, promote teaching that would indoctrinate students with ideologies such as CRT that conflict with the principle of equal protection under the law or encourage students to discriminate against someone based on the individual's color, creed, race, ethnicity, sex, age, marital status, familial status, disability, religion, national origin, or any other characteristic protected by federal or state law. So at face value, the goal of this executive order is to just make sure we're not encouraging students to discriminate against one another. At least that's what it appears to be at face value. So I wanted us to take a look at what some of the violations of this executive order have been, and I will go ahead and let you all know that the school district where I currently work is a part of this list of school districts that has violated this executive order. Okay, so at the top of the list, we have Fayetteville School District. And Fayetteville School District had students complete this survey. And in this survey, it asked students what their gender or gender identity is in the survey. It states that they also conspired to keep children's gender identity a secret from their parents. So I don't know that you all can see what the questions are, but the first question is, well, it asks students what are their preferred pronouns, and then it asks students if they are able to use those pronouns in front of the class. And so students say yes or no if the teacher is able to use those pronouns in front of the class. The next question is, may I use these pronouns when I contact home? And so students are able to say yes or no if the educators are able to use that pronoun when they contact their parents. May I use these pronouns in front of other teachers? Yes or no. And would you like me to follow up with you in a private conversation about your pronouns? So this was a survey that went out to students in Fayetteville School District, and Fayetteville did receive a citation for violating the executive order on indoctrination. In response to this, the district, oh, we've got a lot of sound. In response to this, Fayetteville School District promised to remove gender theory from classroom materials and assured the department that it would not hide a child's gender identity from parents. Now, I do want to remind you all that just a few moments ago, I read to you an excerpt from the executive order, and the executive order stated that the goal was to prevent discrimination against other students. And as you can see, Fayetteville School District appears to be making an attempt to ensure that they are not discriminating against students based on gender identity, but this was considered a violation of that indoctrination executive order. And then in my beloved school district, North Little Rock School District, Arkansas State University did a presentation for teachers in the school district at North Little Rock High School. And the program contained what was considered divisive materials, and it was considered a violation of the governor's executive order. So here in the bullets, you can see some of the things that were considered divisive materials. The program instructed participants to acknowledge that they harbor unconscious biases. It asked teachers to host conversations in their classrooms around systemic racism. Dr. Ware, just a few moments ago, spoke about the importance of conversation. When we talk about race relations, you have to have a part of that relations is the conversations. And so this piece of the professional development was encouraging teachers to host these conversations in their classrooms. It also included this video. You can click on the link and view the video from David Jones Media, justifying, according to this citation, justifying looting during the 2020 Black Lives Matter riots and highlighting the offensive phrase ACAB, all cops are bastards. The host said things like, if the social contract is broken, why the expletive? Do I give an expletive about burning the expletive Football Hall of Fame, about burning an expletive Target? As far as I'm concerned, they can burn this expletive to the ground. They are lucky that what black people are looking for is equality and not revenge. It positively highlighted actions taken to appease leftists in the wake of the 2020 Black Lives Matter riots. It belittled the police and called for accountability for the police officers who keep North Little Rock teachers and students safe. And it encouraged educators to curtail disciplinary policies if they disproportionately affect students of a certain background with no regard for the effectiveness of the disciplinary policies. So for this reason, North Little Rock School District was in violation of the executive order against indoctrination. And I just want you all to I want you to just sit with that. And remember that at face value, the executive order stated that it was trying to prevent discrimination. And even in this list of reasons why North Little Rock School District was in violation of the executive order, you can see efforts where the school district was trying to prevent discrimination. So in the place where it's the final bullet, where it says, it encouraged educators to curtail disciplinary policies if they disproportionately affect students of a certain background. That piece right there is encouraging educators to consider the disciplinary practices that they're using and to consider whether or not those disciplinary policies disproportionately impact a certain group of students. That is encouraging educators to not discriminate. However, this was considered a violation of the executive order against indoctrination. In response to this, the Arkansas Department of Education contacted both Arkansas State University and North Little Rock School District, and both of these schools promised to revise their internal approval process for teacher training materials and to end the dissemination of divisive content. So what this looked like in North Little Rock School District is now on our professional development request form. So anytime an administrator wants to lead professional development, we follow a process and we fill out a professional development approval form. And so now, to ensure that we're not presenting divisive materials, there is an additional piece on our professional development form that states, I have certified that this professional development does not violate the executive order against indoctrination. And so all building leaders, all district leaders have been tasked with ensuring that nothing that someone brings to our building or nothing that we present in our building is in violation of this executive order. And we have to check the box, we have to sign our name, and then if any of the material that is presented is to be found in violation of that executive order, then that's on us, because we checked the box and we signed the name saying that we were sure that it didn't violate the executive order. There are several other examples, but I won't go through all of these. All of this information is online, so if you're ever curious as to other school districts that have violated this executive order, you can take a look at this. This is from Pulaski County. They were celebrating Pride Month, and these are some examples of some material that was hung in classrooms, and this was considered a violation of the executive order. Okay, so let's talk about accountability for teachers. In the state of Arkansas, teachers are held accountable to this rubric. This rubric is Charlotte Danielson's framework for teaching. And so what happens is all teachers are observed by their administrators, and administrators will evaluate them on these components. So I go into teachers' classrooms, I focus on this rubric, and based on this rubric, I evaluate whether or not a teacher is an effective teacher. There are 4 domains, and each domain has components, and then each of those components has a rubric that lets you know how you measure whether or not a teacher is effective. So I wanted us to dig into a few of these components. You can see that I've circled 5. And so I want us to dig into 5 of these components that are on the rubric that holds teachers accountable to being effective teachers. So component 1B is demonstrating knowledge of students. According to the test rubric, an effective teacher is a teacher that actively seeks knowledge of students' backgrounds, cultures, skills, language proficiency, interests, and special needs, and attains this knowledge for groups of students. I do want you to think back to when Fayetteville School District was asking students what pronouns they prefer to use. So according to this rubric, teachers that ask students that question would be effective teachers because they are seeking knowledge about their students' backgrounds. 2A states, creating an environment of respect and rapport. An effective teacher has classroom interactions between teacher and students and among students that are polite and respectful, reflecting general warmth and caring, and are appropriate to the cultural and developmental differences among groups of students. So once again, I will go back to when Fayetteville was asking students the correct pronoun to use for them. That is a great way to ensure that the environment in a classroom is respectful. Call people what they want to be called. That is how you be respectful. Additionally, I want you to think back to when North Little Rock School District was encouraging teachers to consider their unconscious biases and make sure that they're not being biased in the way that they communicate with students and the way that they issue discipline. That would be considered effective under the 2A component of the test rubric. 4C, communicating with families. An effective teacher is a teacher that communicates frequently with families and successfully engages them in the instructional program. Information to families about individual students is conveyed in a culturally appropriate manner. So that means that the teacher is sure that however they are communicating with the students' families, they're being mindful of that student's cultural background, they're being mindful of what's considered respectful in that student's culture. And I want you to also to consider that teachers don't know everything. And so in order to ensure that teachers are effective on this component, as administrators, it is our responsibility to provide the professional development and the coaching necessary to ensure that teachers are communicating in a culturally appropriate manner. And if we go back to those violations of the executive order, you will see that that is exactly what North Little Rock School District was attempting to do. 3A, communicating with students. An effective teacher. Expectations for learning, directions and procedures, and explanations of content are clear to students. Communications are appropriate for students' cultures and levels of development. So there again, teachers are expected to consider students' cultural backgrounds in the way that they're communicating with students. Engaging students in learning, 3C. It states, an effective teacher has activities and assignments, materials, and groupings of students are fully appropriate for the instructional outcomes and students' cultures and levels of understanding. And so that's the piece that I want to highlight. Teachers are expected to ensure that our instructional material is culturally responsive. And one of the ways that you ensure that your instructional material is culturally responsive is that you examine it for any bias. Remember that North Little Rock School District was accused of violating the executive order for doing that very thing. And so my question is, how is it that administrators are to hold teachers accountable to the rubric that the state is requiring us to hold teachers accountable to when there is an executive order against indoctrination. How do we do that when the executive order states or seems to say, based on the violations that we've viewed, that we can't actually do the things that the rubric says that we must do in order to be effective teachers? Okay, let's take a look at another rubric. These are a few of the NELP standards. The NELP standards are the standards that leaders are held accountable to when we are in our training programs. So these are excerpts of the NELP standards for district level leaders, but there are also NELP standards for building level leaders as well. And so our universities all across the state are responsible for ensuring that their students are proficient on these standards. So I wanted us to just take a look at number 3, and I'll just read through these components. Component 3.1 says that program completers understand and demonstrate the capacity to evaluate, cultivate, and advocate for a supportive and inclusive district culture. Component 3.2 says program completers understand and demonstrate the capacity to evaluate, cultivate, and advocate for equitable access to safe and nurturing schools and the opportunities and resources, including instructional materials, technologies, classrooms, teachers, interventions, and adult relationships necessary to support the success and well-being of each student. Component 3.3, program completers understand and demonstrate the capacity to evaluate, advocate, and cultivate equitable, inclusive, and culturally responsive instructional and behavior support practices among teachers and staff. So again, I ask the question, how do universities prepare their leaders, their future leaders, to be proficient leaders when there is an executive order against indoctrination that would impact the way that universities are able to ensure that students are meeting this standard? And then I know this room is full of educators, and so educators, you all know that cultural responsiveness is a big part of our education. We are to be culturally responsive and to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all of our students and to be considering all of their cultures and how we're going to bring those into the classrooms. But I ask the question, how do we have conversations that encourage equity in our classrooms when we have an executive order against indoctrination that is preventing these conversations? Okay, so let's move into LEARNS. That was the executive order on indoctrination. We're going to talk a little bit about LEARNS. Let me check my time. Okay, so LEARNS stands for Literacy, Empowerment, Accountability, Readiness, Networking, and Safety. The literacy piece focuses on students being able to read, in particular, ensuring that students are proficient at reading or that they're reading at grade level by 3rd grade. Empowerment addresses parents' ability to choose where their students go to school and to choose the best fit for their students. Accountability addresses how educators are held accountable to ensuring that students are growing and achieving in their schools. Readiness addresses career readiness, and so this speaks to the career pathways that are offered in high schools, and it also speaks to the ways that elementaries and middle schools help prepare students to go to high school and participate in a career pathway. Networking addresses access to technology, and safety quite clearly focuses on physical safety. and not necessarily emotional or mental safety, as we see when we go back to the example of the violations of the indoctrination on the executive order. When Fayetteville School District was attempting to ensure some emotional and mental safety in their classrooms, they were in violation of the indoctrination executive order. And so when the LEARN speaks to safety, it is speaking in particular to physical safety of the buildings. We're not going to talk about each of the pieces of LEARNs. There are just a few pieces that I want to highlight. So the first piece I want to speak to is empowerment. So as a part of the empowerment piece of LEARNs, there are now EFAs, or Educational Freedom Accounts. And so I'm going to read to you this excerpt about Education Freedom Accounts. It says, Education Freedom Accounts may be used by eligible families to cover private school tuition, fees, uniforms, and some other required expenses. Education Freedom Accounts provide funding up to 90% of the state's prior year per student foundation funding amount, up to around $6,600 for the 2023-2024 school year. And so I'm gonna back up a little bit. This piece that talks about foundation funding. Foundation funding is the funding that each school district receives based on the number of students that we have. So the more students you have, the more foundation funding you receive. The fewer students you have, the less foundation funding you're going to receive. And so what EFAs is saying is that they're going to give students 90% of that foundation funding. So right now, 90% of that foundation funding per student would be about $6,600. And so that's the amount that would be given to students for various things as it relates to attending a private school. For this first year of EFAs, there are only certain students who are eligible. So all students are not eligible for EFAs this first year that we have EFAs. So these are the students who are eligible this year for EFAs. First-time kindergartners, students who in the previous year were enrolled in an F-rated school or a level 5 district. Level 5 districts are districts that are in the most intensive level of support from the state. Students who in the previous year were enrolled in the Succeed Scholarship Program, students with a disability, students experiencing homelessness, current or former foster care students, and children of active duty military personnel. So these are the only students who are eligible for EFAs this year. Next year they will add another group of students, and then the third year is when all students will be eligible to apply for an EFA. So I want to talk about the impact of empowerment. The major impact of empowerment is financial competition for public schools. So remember that what's happening is that when students receive an EFA, they're receiving 90% of that foundation funding. That also means that if a student is leaving a district, that district is losing that foundation funding. So as students go to private schools, public schools are losing money. I will go back again to Dr. Ware's presentation. Dr. Ware spoke about how there are in particular schools that serve predominantly students of color. They are under-resourced. And so these are the schools that need the most resources. But if you're pulling money out of these schools so that students can attend private schools, you're further perpetuating these schools being under-resourced. That is the major impact of this empowerment piece. Another impact of the empowerment piece, remember that families are only receiving $6,600. And I don't know if anybody else in this room has attended a private school or currently has students in private school, but for most private schools, $6,600 is not going to cover private school tuition. So this $6,600 is really only going to help families that either already can afford private schooling or are right at the brink of being able to afford private schooling. So this may be your upper middle class students who are right there, almost, and their parents are saying, I could put you in private school, but it's going to be a little bit tight. Well, now you're going to receive this $6,600. It may be a little bit easier to afford private schools. So my question is, when we look at students who are on the upper end of middle class, what race predominantly makes up that portion? And then I also want you to think about the fact that because that group, that race of students is a part of the upper part of the middle class, then those would be the students who are most likely to be leaving public schools. And so we're, in addition to looking at public schools losing funding, we could also be looking at public schools losing diversity. Okay, accountability, that's the A in LEARNS. So as a part of accountability, there are a few things that I want to highlight. The first thing I want to highlight is value-added growth scores. So as a part of accountability, each educator is going to have a value-added growth score. And we're kind of nervous about this. We're not totally sure what all the details are, but we know that our score is going to be tied to our salary. And we know that the score is also going to be based on student performance. And so we're very nervous, in particular in schools where students are underperforming, educators are nervous because the better your students perform, the higher your value-added growth score is going to be. The less your students perform, the lower your value-added growth score will be. Under accountability, the RIF policies have changed. So the reduction in force policies are now different. Forever, school districts base their RIF policies on who's been there the longest, on seniority. So the teachers who have been in the school district the longest, those are the last teachers to get RIFed. The teachers that have just gotten there, those are the first teachers to get RIFed or let go when there's a reduction in force. Well, now school districts are not allowed to base their RIFing policies on seniority. School districts base their RIFing policies on value-added growth scores. So teachers that have higher value-added growth scores, they will be the last to be RIFed when there's an reduction in force. The teachers that have the lower value-added growth scores, those are going to be the first teachers that get RIFed if there's a reduction in force. And then also, salary decisions will be tied to these value-added growth scores. Okay, so I wanted to talk about some of the ways this is going to impact our schools. Number one, recruiting strong teachers to schools that serve predominantly Black student populations. So when we talk about the schools that are underperforming, many of these schools serve predominantly Black student bodies. And it is going to be more difficult to recruit strong teachers to these schools if teachers know that their value-added growth score is going to be tied to student performance. So if value-added growth scores are going to be tied to student performance, educators want to go to high-performing schools instead of lower-performing schools so that they have higher value-added growth scores and they can ensure that they have a job and that they have a good salary. Additionally, I predict it will impact recruitment of teachers to areas like special education and English as a second language, because these students' performance levels would be lower, is what we think. And so teachers are going to avoid these areas because they want their students to be high performers, because if their students are high performers, then their value-added growth scores will be higher and they'll have higher salaries and they'll be more likely to keep their jobs. Additionally, accountability is going to impact the way that administrators promote equity. So as a building level leader, I have teachers who teach special ed, I have teachers who teach general education, I have teachers who teach advanced courses, and then I have teachers who teach a blend. It works great right now, but in light of value-added growth scores, teachers are going to want to ensure that they have the high performers. So if one teacher has all the advanced placement students, and another teacher has all the general ed students, and another teacher has all the students who are receiving special education services, they're going to feel like I'm setting them up, as though I'm saying I want this teacher who teaches advanced classes to have the highest value-added growth score, and this teacher who is teaching general ed to have a lower value-added growth score. So in this case, now administrators are going to have to consider how we distribute classes to teachers to ensure that there's equity in terms of how teachers' value-added growth scores are impacted. So to summarize all of this, in the final bullet point, this is the good piece about accountability. I do think that accountability and the value-added growth scores are going to hold teachers accountable to continuously growing, because it's going to it kind of sets up a competition so that we want to keep growing, we want to keep doing better, we want our growth score to go higher, and I do think that that would be a positive benefit of accountability. But overall, my concern is that accountability is going to negatively impact the schools that serve predominantly minority student populations, because those are the schools that historically have underperformed. And my concern is that teachers will be avoiding teaching in these schools even more than they already do, because they're going to be concerned about their value-added growth scores. And then finally, I'm going to end on Black History Month, because it is Black History Month. And everybody gets excited about Black History Month in North Little Rock. Many of our elementary schools do big celebrations for Black History Month, and they have done these celebrations for years. The concern this year, however, is which of these celebrations are going to keep us from getting in trouble under the executive order against indoctrination. And so that is a conversation that is happening around school districts. How do we celebrate Black History Month and ensure that we stay within the guidelines of the executive order? And I'm going to end there. Are there any questions?
Great presentation. You look too young to be having all that information inside of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm not a teacher, should have been a teacher, former banker, do all kind of things. But under that NELP, I'm just curious, because I've listened to news and to the media and everything that has been presented by our current governor. And under that, it said something about inclusive of cultures. And so how is it, now we have Black history, so what is the accountability of the teachers that you're making sure when you're including culture? I mean, that culture is a big word.
Yes.
It's defined differently by many different people. So here we are in Black history, so there should not be a problem. How we're going to address it when in component 3.3 and all that inclusive, that I am, if I'm a teacher, responsible to make sure that I'm teaching this person, I'm Black, I'm African American, and then inclusive of other cultures, that I'm making sure that I'm doing my homework to make sure that there's no problem that this person is left out. So me personally, as I'm listening to it, so you have a left and a right, you're saying two things, but they're entirely different.
Yes, so that's kind of the challenge that we're facing as educators right now. We have always been expected to ensure that we are inclusive in our classrooms, but now some of the ways that we have ensured that we're inclusive, now we're finding out that they're in violation of this executive order. And as leaders, it is difficult for us to figure out how do we continue to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in our buildings and also not get in trouble under this executive order. So yes, it is there. It is saying two different things.
So do you need something from someone outside, or is there any other extra to it to help the teachers to not be tossed left and right? Is there something more that other people can do? Is there a barrier there that this is the way it's gonna be, and, you know, it's like do the best you can, or?
So what we've asked for is like specific guidelines. Like we want them to be listed out so that we can look at the list and go, okay, we won't do that. We'll avoid that. We'll celebrate Black History Month, but ensure that we avoid this list of things that we need to avoid. But we have not received that. So far what is happening is that schools and districts are being, they're having issues with the state, accusing them of violating the executive order, but we were never really given a list of do's and don'ts. And for the educators in the room, y'all know that's not good teaching. If you want people to meet the standard, you have to give them the rubric so that they can use the rubric to guide their behavior. And right now, we really have not been given a rubric to help guide our behavior. And so it's just leaving us kind of in this gray area.
So for the schools and the districts that have been put on this violation list, what's the punishment?
So I'm not positive about the punishment. I know that for our district, we have to give the state feedback for how we're going to make sure we don't violate it again. So in my school district, they added that clause in our professional development request process to make sure that, or to hold us accountable to not violating it. So in each example, school districts have had to provide a response for how they're going to make sure that they don't violate it again.
Any particular rule or law, whether it's an educator or whatever, due process is necessary?
Yes.
Even with the school district or an individual, notification must be given before any form of disciplinary actions are given.
Thank you for that, Dr. Johnson.
My question revolves more around the equality between the STEM teachers, the red ed teachers of general education. Okay, so my question revolves more around the special education teachers, the general education teachers, and the AP teachers. So I can understand how you can mix some of the special education in with the general education,
Yes.
but I don't understand how you're gonna hold accountable for the AP teachers, because normally those teachers only have AP classes, from what I recall.
That is correct. So in many buildings, what many administrators do is they have specific teachers who teach their AP courses. So we identify which teachers are really, really strong when it comes to teaching students who are in AP classes. We look at which teachers are really strong at teaching students who receive special education services. We look at teachers that are strong at teaching general education courses. So we typically base our decisions off the strength of the teachers, because that's what's best for students. You want to make sure that students have the teacher that's best at meeting their needs. But the accountability piece of LEARNS kind of complicates the situation, because teachers are going to want to make sure that we're providing them equitable opportunities to have good growth scores. And as administrators, our concern is making sure that we have the best fit in each of the classrooms to meet students' needs.
Thank you. Thanks very much for this very exceptional presentation.
Yes, sir.
Details. And I'm a retired teacher from Central High School. I am interested in a detail here about how it is that, and who it is, and where those who's are, who are determining that you as an administrator or myself as a teacher is in violation of said executive order. And so is that delineated in writing anywhere, and at what point do people become involved in decisions about material that's being used or activities that are being used in the classroom, et cetera?
That's a really great question. I do not know the answer to the question. Does anybody in the audience know that answer? Who is the who that's determining the violations? I think that is a great question. We also, as educators still currently working in the field, we ask the same question: who is making these decisions? In my experience, some of what has happened is if there is somebody who is in the space who feels uncomfortable, they are able to raise a concern. They're able to make a complaint and say that this district or this building is in violation of the executive order. In North Little Rock, there were people who who were in the audience that day who did not appreciate the conversation about unconscious biases. So people are able to raise complaints if they feel like a district is in violation.
As an educator, someone asked earlier, how could you help? Whether you're a retired educator, whether you are in the private or public sector or nonprofit, become an ally of education and to be knowledgeable of what's going on and keeping abreast. You may say, oh, I don't have these kids, no, they're gone and grown, or I have my grandbabies or something like that. And I'm sensing that all of you all are here for a reason. And so to make yourselves aware of the problems that are of our districts or over the state are being inundated with all these indoctrinations and everything that's not being explained thoroughly to us, but we're supposed to be held accountable to all these standards. And we can't hardly teach because we have to keep track of all the laws and
Right.
everything like that.
Right.
We work all day, all night. I'm all anyway, that's another story. So here's the thing, become an ally, get involved. One thing is to be aware, because we create a citizens group or become a part of a group that say, hey, I want to help these educators. I want to help these students. I want
Yes.
to be an advocate. And I mean advocate. So vehemently that you want every child to succeed.
Yep.
State of Arkansas, as far as I know, we had over $1 billion of surplus money. Hello. Hello.
Yes.
I come from parents of retired military father. My mom never got past the age of, graduation to high school. But they always taught us, education is your way out. That's how I got into education. Your knowledge is your power.
Absolutely.
So everyone, whether you're a doctor, lawyer, you may work at gas station or something, use your power, your circle of influence. You have influence.
Absolutely.
And one thing that I do want to take away from this group today, I love that you mentioned about diversity.
I look across this room, and I see so much diversity, but we need more collaboration. We need more of things where we're all getting to know one another, and not just by this face value that something's wrong with me because I have the color of my skin, or whatever. So speak your voice, speak your truth, even if you're gonna get in trouble.
Yeah.
What did John Lewis say? Get into good trouble.
There we go.
And you said earlier, she may be young, but she's very wise, and I'm the same way. So get into good trouble. When you see that trouble, another quote from him, when you see the house is on fire on one side, and it may not be your house, go to the other side.
There we go.
Thank you for the opportunity today.
Thank you for that. Thank you.